beyond borders.
It's Borderline
with Ireti Bakare-Yusuf.
Let us dive into the heart of global affairs.
We go beyond the headlines and into the real stories shaping our world.
Why pay more than $200 million to have 1,000 Kenyan soldiers come to Haiti when we could use that money to train the police?
What you've done with your grief is actually to spread it and give it and turn it into the love.
This served Netanyahu because he didn't think Hamas would ever be a serious military threat.
Congo is a country with so much wealth. The people have been fighting to regain control.
From the corridors of power to the front lines of change, Borderline brings you in with analysis of the issues.
The U.S. has power over them. Most of them will steal money from Haiti and invest in the U.S.
So people who support Sonko and Jumai, over half of them don't have a voter's card.
Sounds like Nigeria.
Join Ireti Bakare-Yusuf on Borderlines as she engages with policymakers and thought leaders,
giving you perspectives and insights you won't find anywhere else.
Be part of the conversation. Join us live.
Your voice matters on Borderlines as we explore the complexities.
Every Friday at 4 p.m.
on 99.3 Nigeria Info.
Stay informed, stay engaged.
Step into the conversation.
And it's a good afternoon. Lagos, Nigeria, Europe, those of you that join us from Israel, in the diaspora, I could go on and on and on and on. Welcome to Borderlines, the only show that takes you beyond borders. Certainly beyond Nigeria's borders. Right. Those of you who are regulars of Borderlines, you must know what's been happening. We only talk geopolitics here, as you know. A big, massive event. Well, we could have said it shook the world, but it certainly shook Russia. I can admit that it shook me because it was totally unexpected, right? So last weekend, Ukrainian drones struck deep, and I mean deep, inside Russian territory. They destroyed, according to Ukrainian officials in Kiev, over 40 Russian airplanes in one of the boldest operations of the war so far. It was a mission shrouded in secrecy and precision. 18 months in the making, they told us. Operation Spider's Web saw hundreds of AI-trained drones fly undetected across vast stretches of Russian airspace, hitting military aircrafts at their most secure bases. President Zelensky called it, and I quote, historic, he said. Military analysts are calling it a game changer. Some say, it's dangerous. And then, just hours after the assault, came the twist. Zelensky offered an unconditional ceasefire at peace talks in Istanbul. Was it a masterstroke of psychological warfare? Is he playing Putin at his own game? A genuine call for peace? Or a sign that Ukraine is pushing its very last bold move? So as Europe prepares its 18th, and I said 18th package of sanctions on Moscow, and U.S. President Donald Trump warns of, and I quote, devastating retaliation if and when he chooses, or at least if and when Russia chooses. One question looms. Has the battlefield moved in Ukraine's favor after Operation Spider's Web? Does Zelensky now has big, bold shoulders? Right. I have with me today two perfectly brilliant guests who will help us to unpack all of this. Because I tell you, those of us that are in geopolitics, this was big. This was huge. In Nigerian parlance, they say, Jongu don't mature. And I'll explain that to our guests when they come on. My first guest, I shall introduce Professor Andrew Latham, a leading scholar of international security, strategic studies, and political analysis, or at least political economy, rather, at Macalester College, whose work explores how power is wielded and sometimes lost on the global stage. He will be joining us from Minnesota in the US of A. And then we have Nikola Mikovic, I think I pronounced that right, a seasoned geopolitical analyst focused on Russia, Ukraine, Belarus, and the post-Soviet sphere, with bylines in Byline Times, CGTN, Lowy Institute, and many more. He's joining us all the way from Serbia. Like I said, this is Borderlines. We go beyond borders. We are in United States and we are in Belgrade today. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thank you. Right, can you give me a split screen so I can see both their faces at the same time, please? Thank you. It's been a rather interesting week. Well, at least it started last weekend. And for me, somebody who is addicted to the news, because that's my job, I saw that Sky News was boldly stating that they got an exclusive. This was since Saturday. Was it Saturday or Sunday? I can't remember. And then by Monday, everybody's talking about it. So before we go any further, I'm going to come to you first, Prof. Tell us, what did Zelensky, or at least Ukraine, do? And was it smart?
It was about as dumb as the Kursk invasion.
Oops.
It was an utter and complete waste of time, energy, and money, and manpower. This is theatrics. Yeah, it is not going to change what's going on in the Russian-Ukraine war in the slightest. These planes were not that important. The amount of time and energy and money that was invested in blowing them, and first of all, a lot of the drones were shot down. Second of all, a lot of the damage that was done to these planes was just damage. It wasn't, they weren't destroyed. Some of them were, but most of them weren't. And at the end of the day, Russia, and I'm not an advocate of this, but Russia is making incremental changes on the advances on the battlefield every single day. And this Operation Spiderweb, I'm sorry, it's just ridiculous, was a complete and utter waste of time, energy, and money. Makes no difference. Not operationally, not strategically, even though it was kind of weirdly, tactically interesting. But what a strategic failure this was. It's almost unbelievable, except it's only too believable.
Indeed. Nikola, do you agree? Was it a waste of time?
I agree. Yeah, I agree that it was a strategic failure, Russia's strategic failure. And it's not the first time that Russia suffers such humiliations and failures, because in May last year, Ukraine managed to destroy Russia's early warning radar system. And now it destroyed not 40, I'm pretty sure, but a significant number of Russian aircraft, which is a humiliation for the Kremlin. And the very fact that Russia did not respond properly shows that the Kremlin is just continue taking half measures in this war, and Ukraine is of course using the situation to create a lot of damage to Russian armed forces. That's exactly what was the goal of this operation, in my view. I agree that it will not have a significant impact on the situation on the battlefield, where Russia is making small tactical gains, but I think this is part of preparations for a potential, and in my view, quite probable direct military confrontation between NATO, or at least certain NATO members, and the Russian Federation. So NATO, through Ukraine, is trying to destroy Russia's military capabilities and assets and infrastructure and so on, so that when eventually the war starts, Russia is in a pretty weak position. It is already in a weak position, but it will be even worse if it continues to fight the war this way. And I think that it will, because as long as Putin's in charge in the Kremlin, and characters like Sergei Lavrov or Roman Abramovich and so on, I don't expect any significant changes. So yeah, from that perspective, I don't think that Ukraine's attack was a waste of time. From their perspective, I think it perfectly made sense. And if you look in the media sphere, nobody's afraid of Russia anymore because Kiev and all other Moscow's opponents, they know that no matter what happens, Russia will not respond seriously. And that's why they feel encouraged to continue attacking Russian infrastructure, military infrastructure, energy, and so on. Unlike the Kremlin that does not dare to strike any bridges, for instance, on the Dnieper River in Ukraine, Ukraine is successfully destroying Russia's bridges in Russia's Kursk region and Belgorod and so on, which puts the Kremlin in a pretty difficult position, especially at home.
Interesting. So, Prof, let me come. Well, Prof, if you're saying it was stupid or whatever it was, the word you used, paraphrase, and you're saying it's not going to make a difference, let's then look at the fact that, they destroyed 40 aircrafts, is that correct? What then would have been the point, or at the very least, why would Putin be then saying, I need to revenge, or at least I need to respond, according to what Trump told us? Prof, over to you.
Is that over to me?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, here's the thing. Those those aircraft were really part of the Soviet Union's nuclear deterrent force. They have not been in any way, shape, or form important in this war. They're marginal, absolutely marginal. And like I said, the Kursk offensive was strategically the most stupid thing I've ever seen in my life. And this campaign against these 40 bombers, some of which were destroyed, some of which were just damaged, was the most unbelievable waste of time and energy strategically that one could imagine. Now, having said that, the Ukrainians and people in the West who are Ukraine focused really they're just loving the theatrics of this. And that's what it really boils down to. It's theatricality. It is going to have absolutely no effect on the outcome of this war. I wish it were different. I'm not a Russian advocate.
But
I wish it were different, but it's not. It was a total theatric, and anybody who believes that this operation is going to change the outcome of the war is delusional. Absolutely delusional.
okay, so in that case then, why, if it's not going to change anything, if indeed it's pointless as you want us to believe, why then is President Putin angry? Because clearly he's angry.
Well, he's always angry, isn't he? That's just his disposition. But let's just see what the retaliation will be. Here's my guess. I mean, there was a little bit of retaliation already, but not going to be that much. Why would a rational actor, and assuming that he's rationally, on the margins at least, rational, why would anybody waste any resources retaliating against an operation that was utterly and totally and completely futile? Nobody would. I wouldn't. Somebody poked me in the eye.
Mm-hmm. But what we were led to understand, so are you then saying that, because one of the things we were led to understand was that these aircrafts that were attacked, if you like, that were bombed, are part of the nuclear arsenal, which are meant to be displayed. And therefore, in order for Ukraine to actually be able to know the coordinates for where they are, somebody in NATO, at least a NATO country, must have given Ukraine the coordinates.
Well, does anybody believe that this is going to escalate to a nuclear war between NATO and Russia? No, nobody in their right mind does.
Right.
So these particular aircraft, some of which were destroyed, most of which were damaged, and Russia doesn't produce these aircraft anymore because they're Soviet legacies. They're not. And some of them were used to launch cruise missiles against Ukraine, but they're not strategically important. And to have damaged and or destroyed, 10 of them, 20 of them, is the most strategically irrelevant development in this war.
Okay.
And I know that people in the West, and people in Ukraine in particular, love to talk about how this is so wonderful.
Right.
This is so unbelievably, magically wonderful. Maybe tactically, operationally, and strategically, utterly, completely, and broadly irrelevant.
Okay. Nikola, let me come back to you. If I ask if you agree with Prof, I believe I know what you're going to say. So let's not go there. Let's go to the point where, what is it? So after doing the strike, after such a successful strike, what was Ukraine themselves looking to achieve? Or was it just a case of proving to their Western, if you like, sponsors, supporters, however you want to put it, that they actually can stand up to the giants?
I think they wanted to show that Russia is weak, as I said, and that they can do what they want and the Kremlin will not respond. So in 2022, they already destroyed Russia's Moskva Navy ship, and we heard exactly the same narrative, that it doesn't matter that that ship is not important. Now we're hearing exactly the same stories. I think all these attacks show that Russia is not prepared to fight this war and is not fighting this war seriously. And Ukraine also, by striking Russia's military facilities, is showing that it's a message to the ordinary people in Russia that they're not safe and that the war has come to their country as well. Another aspect here is that Russia is not even trying to protect its aircraft in those military bases. We don't see anti-drone facilities there, or we don't see any kind of protection, which is amazing to me because this war has been going on for 3 years already and they're not protecting their aircraft. Of course, yeah, we can say those aircraft, they're just not important, but I disagree with that. I think everything is important, and I certainly don't think that Israel, for instance, would allow its opponents to destroy its military forces, aircraft, or any other strategically important facilities or military bases. So it would retaliate immediately, as it did in the past, but Russia is not doing that. It is just threatening to respond, but in reality, it never does. Or if it hits some facilities in Ukraine, we never know what exactly was hit. So when Ukraine strikes Russian targets, we know what exactly was hit. We know the number of destroyed aircraft or tanks or whatever with bridges. When Russia strikes Kiev or some other cities in Ukraine, we know that something was hit, right? Something was hit, but we don't know what exactly. We just hear reports like explosions in Kiev or explosions in Dnipro or somewhere, but we don't know what exactly Russia hit.
And who then do we hold, sorry to interrupt you, who then do we hold responsible for that? Because it's a good point that you make.
Well, I think it's the Kremlin that's responsible, Vladimir Putin and the Russian political leadership and military leadership as well, because they're not fighting this war seriously. And that's for me, that's quite obvious from the very first day of this war. Unlike Ukraine, that is fighting seriously and is fighting to win. Now, it's rather questionable if it will be allowed to win, if the West will allow Kiev to win the war and to achieve its military goals. But that's my impression, that they certainly want to win the war. unlike Russia that's fighting to reach some kind of deal with its Western partners. And I think that's the core goal of this so-called special military operation that Russia is conducting in Ukraine.
Okay, it's interesting. You've said that 3 or 4 times now that Russia is not taking this war seriously. I have to ask you to expand on that, and even more so. You said something. You said Ukraine wants to win if the Western supporters allow them to win. Please expatiate on both of those for us.
Well, there are political circles in the West that would certainly want Ukraine to win the war, and they think that such an outcome would possibly lead to the breakup of the Russian Federation. But I think the mainstream option in the West wants this war to end in such a way that there is no clear winner. And because if Ukraine wins, then it will be too strong from the Western perspective. And I don't think that's what they want to allow to happen. So I think from their perspective, both countries should be, well, defeated in a way. But it is Russia that should suffer a lot as a result of this war. So I think there is some kind of a conflict management here that's trying to move things in that direction, that Ukraine causes serious damage to the Russian military forces. And then if a direct conflict between Russia and NATO eventually takes place, then Russia will not be in a position to fight that war at all and will be defeated. Now, I'm not saying that's what's going to happen, but that's what I think that some policymakers in the West think about seriously, and that's what I would do if I were a policymaker.
Okay, Prof, if I may bring you back, this is interesting. What Nikola tells us, that it's possible the West or forces in the West do not want Ukraine to actually win, or do not want both parties to win. Why then? Firstly, do you agree with that? And if so, why then didn't they accept the diplomatic solution before the war, which Angela Merkel was working towards, which Macron was working towards, which was stopped specifically, or shall I say physically, by Boris Johnson and indeed Kamala Harris? What's going on? What are we missing?
First of all, anybody who takes Angela Merkel or Emmanuel Macron seriously is crazy.
Okay.
Second of all,
why do you say that? First, see, on this show, you don't get away with saying anything.
Yeah, because they're delusional in terms of what's happening on the battlefield. Russia, I don't endorse this, but this is the reality. Russia is winning. They're going to capture, they're going to conquer those 4 oblasts, and they're not interested in conquering all of Ukraine, but they are interested in neutralizing Ukraine. So that's what we have. You look at the Russian Constitution, actually says that those 4 oblasts, those 4 provinces, are part of Russia, the Russian Federation. And Putin is not going to stop until at least 95% of those 4 oblasts are integrated into the Russian Federation. It's not going to happen. Does Russia want to conquer all of Ukraine? You know, I know some people think that he's got some imperialist delusions, but that's not true.
So what you're telling us is that Vladimir Putin is not looking to recreate USSR, as we've been told. So
no,
right.
There's no evidence that supports that. I bet you in 3 weeks, if those 4 oblasts were totally conquered and reintegrated into Russia, that would be the end of things. Having said that, though, the Russians, Putin, Moscow, Russia, however you want to frame that, they really don't want Ukraine to be integrated into the European Union or NATO, or they want it to be neutralized. So there's those are the 2 war objectives: integrating those 4 oblasts and neutralizing Ukraine. Do I think that's a good, wonderful? No, I don't, actually. But that's the reality on the ground.
Yeah. Hello, can you hear me?
I can. That's my dog barking in the background.
Oh, right. Perhaps he's disagreeing with you.
Yeah.
But for the sake of my listeners, can you just tell us the four oblasts that you're mentioning, and then I'll go on to my question.
So it's Donetsk, Kherson, Zaporozhye, and sorry, the other one's just popping out of my mind at the moment. But that is what the Russian Constitution says. They claim that those four, and we can call them states, provinces, oblasts, whatever you want, they are an integral part of the Russian Federation. And they're not going to give up on that.
So, but Ukraine isn't willing to give up those regions.
Well, this is why we have wars. On the one hand, the Russians make their claims. On the other hand, the Ukrainians are not willing to give up their claims. And so you have this clash, which now has obviously for the last 3 years broken out into violent clash, armed clash. I could, as a scholar of international relations, I can go back at least 1,000 years to tell you about clashes between political units that are claiming sovereignty over this or that. I mean, that's just the nature of things.
So does that mean then that all the kerfuffle and, the whole sort of running around, trying to peacemake, President Trump and his rare earth deal, etc., are all rather pointless?
Well, first of all, your use of the word kerfuffle, as a Canadian, I really appreciate that. I might say brouhaha.
Brouhaha. Yes, indeed.
Yes, but to answer your question directly, that mineral deal is another irrelevance. I know that some people like to think that it will anchor the United States so that they'll have a vested interest and therefore there's a security guarantee and whatnot. That's just silly. It's just silly. Most of the critical minerals and the rare earth elements that Ukraine has are now under the control of Russia. They actually don't have anything to offer.
Right. Okay. Nikola, are you still there? This is interesting. Prof is painting a rather, how should I say, doomsday picture of this whole war. And I need you to tell us, does Ukraine have any room to play? Do they have any room to negotiate? Indeed, Volodymyr Zelensky is talking ceasefire. He's actually saying, look, after what has happened, when we get to Istanbul, let's talk ceasefire. And that ceasefire can be led by, the Russians. But according to Prof, unless Vladimir Putin gets his land back, quote unquote, I'm being cheeky now, he's not willing to put down the guns. Nikola,
I don't think there will be any. I don't think there will be any ceasefire agreements anytime soon. I will get back to your question, but if you allow me just to
please
say
go
a few
ahead.
words on
Yeah,
those
go ahead.
four regions that you mentioned. Actually, it's 5 regions, or maybe even 6, because it's the Crimea and the city of Sevastopol, plus those 4 regions. But initially, when Putin launched this so-called special military operation, his goal was not to incorporate Zaporizhia and Kherson regions into the Russian Federation. He only spoke about the Donbass, which means those 2 oblasts in the Donbass region, Donetsk and Luhansk oblasts. So after that, in 2022, he decided to annex those 4 regions, right? Russia still does not control all that territory. So I think it will take years for Russia to capture those remaining parts of those 4 regions. In the meantime, there will be some attempts to reach a ceasefire agreement, although I don't think that will work because it wouldn't make any sense from Ukrainian perspective to to allow Russia to consolidate its positions. And also from the Russian perspective, their officials openly said that ceasefire would mean that Ukraine would have time to get more weapons from the West and then to prepare for another round of fighting. So that's why I don't expect a ceasefire. Maybe there will be some local ceasefire deals. Yeah, that's entirely possible. But a major one, like a 30-day ceasefire, I don't see that happening in the near future. What I can see happening is Ukraine's attempt to capture some other parts of the Russian Federation, maybe even Crimea. I wouldn't rule that out. Russia, on the other hand, is expected to continue launching those frontal assaults attacks, trying to seize strategically completely insignificant villages in Ukraine's Sumy region and in the Donbass as well. But that will not change the overall strategic picture here, because it is Russia that aims to achieve a strategic goal to, as Professor said, to neutralize Ukraine, although I don't see how that can happen without having a pro-Russian puppet government in Kiev. And I cannot see that happening unless Russia actually captures Kiev, which is virtually impossible unless Putin decides to declare a nationwide mobilization. And that's something he does not want to do for political reasons, because such a move would be widely unpopular in Russia. So he's trying to take these half measures aiming to achieve some tactical goals. But I think in the long term, he will have to make some changes if he wants to achieve the goals of his war. Otherwise, Russia will suffer a defeat in the long term.
You really think so? You think David will beat Goliath?
I think so. Well, I think that's the only possible outcome of this war. So either Russia will be defeated or Ukraine will suffer a defeat. I don't think it's possible to reach a compromise here, because that's the very nature of this war. And I've been saying that for years now. This war is actually a continuation of the Donbass war that broke out in 2014. So we know how all that started in the Donbass, and before that we had the events in Kiev's Maidan Square. And so basically, as long as Ukraine exists, Russia will see it as a threat. On the other hand, as long as Putin is in charge in the Kremlin, Ukraine and the West will see it as a threat for Kiev and for the West as well. And the war will simply have to go on until one of the two involved parties wins. And I don't see any ceasefire, as I said, being reached anytime soon. So the war will go on.
If that's the case, then how is this affecting the people of Ukraine? Before we even talk about Russia, how is it? I mean, is President Trump correct when he keeps repeating that 6,000 figure? Or is it 5,000? He keeps repeating that 5,000 people are killed. Is he correct? Because both sides are putting out propaganda, let's be honest. We don't know what the correct figure is. So how is this affecting the Ukraine society? And are you able to kind of give us an idea of the correct figure?
I don't think he's talking about civilian casualties. It's possible that significant number of soldiers,
yes. He was talking about soldiers, yeah.
Yes, I cannot say if it's 5,000 or 500, but yeah, a lot of them are dying on the battlefield, on the Russian side as well. And the society is, in my view, they are ready to continue fighting, although Ukraine faces serious manpower issues. A lot of people are trying to flee the country, which is pretty difficult because borders are closed. But then if you look at those polls, people living in Western Ukrainian regions, they are determined to continue fighting, and they think that the Ukrainian armed forces, they should just continue fighting for as long as it takes, while those who live near the front line there, they don't have that view. They think that some kind of a ceasefire or a peace agreement should be reached as soon as possible, which makes sense, of course, because they are direct victims of this whole war. But in general, I think Ukraine is determined to fight for as long as possible, and it can count on Western support, including the United States, despite Trump's threats and attempts to limit support. I think Ukraine will continue getting all kinds of weapons and ammunition and so on, so that it can continue fighting against Russia. And the economic situation in Ukraine is, of course, very difficult, but as long as it can count on the Western support, it will be able to continue fighting. And even if there is a serious manpower issue, then it's quite possible that eventually some NATO countries will send their troops one way or another to Ukraine to fight there. That's exactly what Russia did in Syria during the Syrian civil war. It had to intervene directly to send its own forces. And first they said that they are not there, right? It's a famous Russian joke. So they were called Ich tam нет. They are not there, right? Even though everybody knew that they're there. So now NATO could use the same tactics and send some kind of troops there, saying that they're not there, that they're private troops or whatever. But if Ukraine is not in a position to continue fighting on its own, then the West will have to intervene. That's my
But isn't the West part of it right now? I mean, there are those who argue, let me just say, there are those who argue, and they will tell you that this is Russia versus 30 odd other countries, right? This is not Russia versus Ukraine, because NATO is behind Ukraine.
No.
If
you're asking me, I'll say two things. First of all, Ukraine is running out of manpower. There's pushback in terms of desertions. There's pushback in terms of people fleeing the country. They're running out of manpower. It's not about Western weapons or the U.S. backstop or anything like that. They're simply running out of young, in fact, not even young men. You know what the average age of a Ukrainian soldier is?
Tell us.
I think you're going to say 18.
Yeah.
No,
naturally.
It's 43. 43.
Oh.
Imagine that, right? They're running out of manpower because, young women don't get conscripted. So there's that. It's got nothing to do with how many weapons the West provides. So that's a fundamental fact, which is going to determine the outcome of this war. Do you know how many young Ukrainian men have fled the country so they don't get conscripted? At least 1 million. They don't want to fight for their country.
But why not? And this is interesting.
I don't know, because I'm a Canadian, I was a soldier, I wanted to fight for my country. They don't want to fight for theirs. So they're running out of gas, is what it boils down to. And it's got nothing to do with, and if anybody on this planet thinks that that French or British troops will be deployed to Ukraine, they are out of their minds. First of all, the British Army is hopeless. Second of all, the French don't really have much of an army anymore. But nobody, there's no scenario in which NATO forces will actually be deployed on the ground in Ukraine. It's not going to happen. And and I'm not just talking about French and Brits. There's no possibility that the Americans will be deployed there. It's just not going to happen. You know why? Because people in the West like to posture, but they don't really want a third world war with Russia. That's the bottom line. End of story.
But you've
they really don't.
If I may just come back then, but you just told us, Prof, a few minutes ago that Russia is not going to use the nukes. Russia is not going to press the button as we normal, ordinary, non-military people call it, right? So and it is fascinating that the average age of a Ukrainian fighter is 43, and 1 million of them have left their country. It's also curious that they don't want to fight for Ukraine. Is that because President Zelensky doesn't have the support of the people? Or is that because the people of Ukraine actually prefer to be part of Russia? Or is it because they're just afraid of what Russia could do?
Well, it's a bunch of things. First of all, President Zelensky is literally a clown. You know that, right? That's his background. He was a comedian. I don't think he was I don't treat him as a serious political actor. I know that he is treated that way in the Western media. He's glorified and whatnot, but I don't. Here's the bottom line when it comes to how this war broke out. NATO expanded. There was the Maidan business, right? And Zelensky came to power. And Zelensky was, first of all, and I'm not letting Russia off the hook here. I think we need to be honest and serious that Zelensky and his crowd, first of all, tried to ethnically cleanse Russia from the oblasts, right? In terms of eliminating language programs and whatnot. So the expansion of NATO and his ethnic cleansing program, you put all of that together, and any rational actor in Moscow would react in a particular way, which we have seen unfolding on the ground. Again, I have no time for Vladimir Putin, and I have no time for Russia, and it's. But when I'm looking at this from a 30,000-foot perspective, this is what I see in terms of how we got to where we are today. It's not Russian imperialism and blah, blah, blah. It's not that. It is NATO, the United States, the West, and Volodymyr Zelensky and his crowd doing certain things which triggered other things. And that's why we're here where we are now.
Okay. Nikola, are you still there?
Yes, I'm here. Yeah.
I'm sure you heard Prof. Do you agree with him before I go on to my question? Do you have anything you want to come back to on that? I mean, is it right to call President Zelensky a clown? I quote, you heard.
Comedian.
Well, he was a comedian.
Yes.
Before he became president, yes. But I think he proved to be a much better leader than Vladimir Putin, because I don't take Putin seriously, because all of his empty threats and empty rhetoric, I don't see how anyone can still take him seriously. If he promises to retaliate and he never does, or he does in such a weak way, then I don't see why would anyone take his red lines and his empty threats seriously. Zelensky came to power in 2019, and the war in the Donbass broke out in 2014, right? 5 years before he became Ukraine's president. For me, it's a mystery why Russia did not invade Ukraine in 2014, because at the time, Ukrainian military was on the brink of collapse. It basically didn't exist. Russia had the capacity to, if not to capture the entire Ukraine, then it certainly had the capacity to seize the southeastern Ukraine, where at the time the Russian-speaking population made up the majority in that area, right? Southeast, from Odessa to all the way to Luhansk. But now the situation is completely different, because now many people in Ukraine do not want to speak Russian anymore. Yes, some people don't speak Russian because it's illegal, but there are those who don't want to do that because they see Russia as an aggressor. And the situation for Russia is now much more difficult than it was in 2014. So for me, that's one aspect that's something that I don't understand, why Putin did not invade Ukraine in 2014 if he wanted to prevent Kiev from joining NATO. Although I don't think that was the core goal of this war, because how do we explain the fact that he allowed Finland to join NATO, and when Ukraine joins it, it's a big problem. Although it's rather questionable if Kiev wanted to join NATO at all, and if NATO will allow Ukraine to join. I don't think it will, but so how come Finland can become NATO member and Ukraine cannot? I mean, what difference does it make if NATO deploys missiles near St. Petersburg or near Belgorod? From the military perspective, it's completely irrelevant. So that whole narrative about NATO and Ukraine's alleged NATO ambitions being the reason why Russia invaded Ukraine, for me, just doesn't make much sense. So I don't know why Russia invaded Ukraine, and I'm not afraid to admit that. I think we will know that maybe when this war is over in 10, 15 years from now. Who knows? When we read books written by people who were directly involved in this, then we will probably get a clear picture of what was the whole point of this catastrophic war.
Indeed. Before I go to the lines, because my callers are already, the phone's lines are already going. Very quickly, has sanctions worked on Russia? If you could give me that in like 1 minute. Sanctions.
For which of us is that?
Pardon?
For which of us?
No, well, both of you. Whoever, you can go, Prof.
Well, I'll run with it first, and then my colleague can contradict me, because that's the nature of the beast. The sanctions, they have been partly effective, but not entirely. The Russians have figured workarounds, and there are lots of countries, India, China, some European states, that are happy to buy Russian oil and gas, for example, right? Mm-hmm. So the U.S. does have some reserves in that respect, in terms of the finances, and they could Washington could up the game a little bit, but it hasn't so far because it doesn't want to. Really, the U.S. does not want to alienate India. It does not want to screw over the Germans. Sorry, pardon my French there.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah. So there's that. Could the U.S. and the West more broadly up the game and tighten the screws? Yeah, but there's no incentive to do so.
Okay.
Right. And that's just the way it is.
Okay. Nikola, before I come to you, the lines are going. Let me just answer because I only have 6 minutes left. Hello? Hello? Hello?
Good evening.
Good evening.
Hello, good evening.
Good evening.
Yeah.
What's your name? Where are you calling from, please?
This is Femi from Elegushi.
Please, go ahead. Very quickly. Very quickly. We have 6 minutes left.
Yeah, since you see this, I will classify Russia president. The president is a kind of a person that, if he doesn't agree with somebody like the West,
I need you to be quick, honestly.
Yeah, the West doesn't have anything free. It's just because he disagrees with the intention of the West. That is why all this is going on. Because even the attack from Ukraine is even being sponsored. I know it's sponsored.
Okay,
it's
all right.
Western work.
Thank you.
And the West are always to take whatever they comes, they have to. That is even the condition we have.
Thank you. Right. Hello.
Yeah, good evening, SCCOG.
Good evening. You have one question, Emmanuel, please. One. Very quickly.
It might even be a comment. I want to disagree with the Prof who said it's a disaster for Ukraine. We're blowing up those planes.
Okay.
To me, I think sometimes embarrassing your opponent is even a point and a score in war. We've seen Ukraine blown up Russian generals right inside Russia. The military intelligence officers being blown up right inside Russia.
I need you to quickly.
So I think at this point, Russia is losing. Either in the optics, or even in equipment.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Hello?
Hello?
Yes, go ahead.
Hello?
Yes.
Good evening. I greet you on their guest. Help me ask your guest. 1989.
No, slowly, Koboko, please. They can't understand.
When U.S. in 1989, when U.S. and Russia signed a pact that U.S. can enter into USSR the country. Why? What was NATO doing in Ukraine that prompted Zelensky say that he want to join NATO? American.
Right, let me answer. I'll come to you. I'll tell you the questions because you may not be hearing it properly. Hello? 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 Hello?
Okay.
Good evening. What's your name? Where are you calling from?
Yeah, Marco from Festac.
Okay, slowly and clearly,
I'm not sure Zelensky will be happy with Prof. But by the way, for his bluntness, I just want to ask. If
if Russia changes, because all the Russians' neighbors are scared of Russia.
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything wrong from them moving from this big brother thing to adopting a more harmonious diplomacy?
With Russia, you mean?
When they do them, yeah, Russia and the neighbors.
Okay.
Because they are running to NATO. They are running to NATO. There must be a reason.
Okay, thank you. Right, Prof. Well, the lines are clear right now. We don't have much time. Right. The question is, apparently Zelensky would be upset with you for what you've said, for all the things you've said about him. But what they are, my last caller, the question he was asking is, why don't they look for a more amicable way to resolve this instead of Ukraine going to NATO and all the other sort of bordering countries running to the EU? Hello, Prof, can you hear me? Hello? Prof, you're on mute. You're on mute. You've muted. I need you to be unmuted. Okay, Nikola, let me come to you whilst we're waiting for Prof because we don't have time. I need Prof unmuted, please. Nikola, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Go ahead. Can you answer that question at all, please?
Well, it's about Zelensky. Is it about Zelensky being replaced by some other political figure? Was that the point?
Yeah, well, it's about the fact that what he said is, why is the likes of Ukraine and other surrounding countries running to NATO, or I think it means the EU, instead of looking for a more amicable way to sort things out with Russia?
Well, frankly, I don't think Ukraine will join the EU anytime soon, if at all. And as I said, I don't expect Ukraine to join NATO either. That, however, does not mean that some NATO troops will not be deployed to Ukraine, not necessarily from countries such as Germany or the United Kingdom or France, but maybe from neighboring Poland or Romania, or maybe as private contractors. That's also entirely possible in the long term if Ukraine faces a huge manpower issues. But for now, they can continue fighting this way.
Okay.
I don't think it will be a big deal. Yes, they face problems, but it's not something that cannot be resolved to continue fighting the war this way, basically, a lower scale for now.
Okay, Prof, I don't know whether you heard me earlier. The last call I picked up, he said Zelensky would be upset with you by all that you're saying, but he also said, why isn't there a sort of more amicable resolution solution, rather than them running to NATO? And I think he meant the EU.
Is that one for me?
Yes, it is. And I'm going to give you a minute because the lines are going.
I'm going to give you one little anecdote, which I think everybody needs to know.
Okay, go ahead, please.
Mothers in Ukraine are increasingly disaffected with this war. They don't want their husbands, their fathers, or their sons dying, and really putting a lot of pressure on the Zelensky government. And I think that is really an important note to sound. Women are pissed off with Zelensky and his government, and I don't think he's going to survive this.
Okay. All right. Hello? Hello?
Hello? Hello?
Yeah, please turn off your radio, please, very quickly. Hello? Hello?
Hello, can I continue?
You must turn off your radio, otherwise I have to cut you off.
Okay, let me turn it off. Hello?
Yes, go ahead, very quickly.
Yeah, my question is, are you with me?
Yes.
Yeah. My question is, why is Ukraine, the government of Ukraine, turned themselves to a guinea pig, which America and the West, they're trying their weapons on Ukraine soldiers? Why?
Okay.
Because Russia will have wanted the whole Roman Empire, and they are looking for the whole Roman Empire. So I don't think the West, Europeans will join hand, West Europe will join hand in coming to fight for Ukraine.
Okay. I think you heard that. Did you hear him? Prof? Okay, let me pick up another call. Hello? Hello?
Good evening. How are you?
I'm very well, Titilope. How are you?
Yeah, thank you. My question is to, number one, I appreciate Prof. I agree 100% with Prof. And I believe Zelensky is fighting a reckless war. Very, very unnecessary. That's one. Number two, sir. Romania just had an election and an anti-Russia government leadership emerged. That is going to give a buffer to Ukraine in terms of transportation of weapons from the allies. What is the kind of threat that is going to pose to Russia? And what does it think Russia can do to Romania? Thank you.
All right. Right, Prof, I guess that was directed at you. Did you hear the question? It was about Romania.
I didn't hear it entirely.
I think what he wants to know is what's the impact of the Romanian election, the outcome of Romanian election on the current war, at least on, Russia.
Yeah. Well, the thing about the Romanian election is it a democracy, a constitutional democracy or not? Was the candidate legitimately marginalized and excised, actually, or was he simply an illegitimate candidate? I think my own view is, and again, I'm not totally au fait, as it were, with Romanian politics, but I would say this: he should have been allowed to run and let the Romanian people decide, rather than having him disqualified at the outset. So I'm old school. I like democracy, and I think the people, rather than the courts, should be deciding who's going to govern them. Okay. And that wasn't what happened in that case.
Nikola, if I may come to you to answer that, because we're about to go to news. Do you have anything to add to that? Yes, please.
I don't think that the allegedly pro-Russian candidate was actually pro-Russian. He was simply pro-Romanian, and it's quite possible that he didn't want Romania to directly participate in this war in Ukraine, but that does not make him necessarily pro-Russian. In the West media, they often tend to label anyone who disagrees with the official narrative as a pro-Russian, which is not true in this case. But it is what it is now. Romania will simply continue providing weapons to Ukraine and possibly even troops if necessary. So that's the result of the elections.
I have to go to the news. Professor Andrew Latham and Nikola Mikovic, thank you so much for joining us. But we are going to be inviting you back because the lines are still going. Have a wonderful weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you.
On 99.3